Well, good morning again, Communitas. I'm glad you joined us. Hope you enjoyed the music. Before we turn to the Word, just one quick word from me, and that is Happy Mother's Day. So for all you mothers there, I hope you're able to spend time with your kids. Some of you have maybe been with your kids in the last month more than you want to be, but some of you maybe wish you could be with your kids, but because of the situation, you're not. But in any case, Happy Mother's Day. I hope this will be a good day for you and that someone will do something special for you today. With that out of the way, we will turn to the Word. So if you need to get your coffee or tea, do that. And we're continuing with our study of Exodus. Now, all of you are familiar, or probably most of you are familiar with the way certain kinds of social media work. And some of you have seen this on people's Facebook page or somewhere else, their relationship status. And of course, one of the choices people can click is in relationship. And here you can see on this screen, you kind of know what it might mean by comparing it to the other choices. But that phrase in relationship is quite broad. And probably some people say they are in relationship as a way to avoid trying to explain exactly what kind of relationship they are in. But of course, that word relationship is important for our study of Exodus because we've been using these R's to think about the flow of the story. So there's rescue, but then there's relationship, and that's a key idea for what's going on in Exodus. And of course, then there's rules. The last 2 weeks, we've been talking a little bit about the law and why it was given and the wisdom that is found in the law, a little bit about how we can use it well today. But then also all of this, what God is doing, it's so that His people could represent Him in the world. But you know, these social media choices, of course, another choice that sometimes people choose is it's complicated. Of course, that would be accurate for the story of Exodus. We are, if you've read Exodus, you have already seen that it's quite a complicated relationship that the people are having with God, the Moses is having with God, and Moses is having with people. And man, it's complicated, and it's going to continue to be complicated. If you're familiar with the Old Testament stories, you know how complicated that relationship is. But in any case, God and His people are in relationship, and the question I want us to think about today is, what is the nature of this relationship? And thinking about the tabernacle that God had the people build actually tells us something about this relationship. And so we're today, and then in a very different way next week, going to be thinking about this tent, this tabernacle, this building that God wanted the people to build, to make, and to put up, and what it means for us. And the interesting thing is it's obviously important to this story of Exodus. Even though, you know, many of you as you're reading Exodus, you might not think of it as the most important part of Exodus, or even if you've read it more than once, I'm guessing, and be honest with me, I'm guessing that some of you have just kind of done a speed reading of all those chapters describing in detail this tabernacle. And especially because what's interesting in Exodus is first there's like 5 or 6 chapters where God gives the details to Moses. And then there's several other very critical incidences that we will look at in a few weeks. And then once again, pretty much all those same details are given again. So you have, 10, 12 chapters of 40 chapters that are given to the tabernacle, and you have the same details given twice. So obviously for the book of Exodus, this is important. Even though for us, we're like, oh, let's get to the action. I don't get all these details and why they're there. So the question is, what is this story doing there? What is the tabernacle doing there? Why are so many of the details given in the book of Exodus, and why are they even repeated? What is its place in this story? Well, the story begins in Exodus chapter 25. And Moses is once again meeting with God on the mountain. And it says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, tell the sons of Israel to raise a contribution for me. From every man whose heart moves him, you shall raise a contribution. Next week, we'll talk a little bit about how people are involved in this process. But this is a contribution which you are to raise from them: gold, silver, bronze, these metals, blue, purple, scarlet, materials, fine linen, goat hair, ram skin. My translation says porpoise skin. It's probably another kind of sea creature. Acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for anointing oil, fragrant incense, various stones that are going to be put in. And so Moses, to collect all of this stuff, and he says gold, silver, and bronze, but it was a lot. It was like, people have calculated, at least 1,000 kilograms of gold, maybe 3,000 or more kilograms of silver, and a couple thousand kilograms of bronze. So this is a lot of stuff of just these precious metals that are being put together to build this tabernacle, this tent, and the things that go in it. But this is especially how these verses end in Exodus 25, verses 8 and 9. Let them construct a sanctuary for me, that I may dwell among them. According to all that I'm going to show you is the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furniture, just so you shall construct it. And so the following chapters go on to give some of the details. And the first thing that is described for Moses to construct is what is probably or almost certainly the most important, the central object for this whole construction. And that's this box called the Ark of the Covenant. And it wasn't a real big box, but it was covered in gold inside and outside. It had gold-covered bars that were kept in it permanently so that it could be picked up and carried when the people were moving. You can see on the top there's these two angels, or these two cherubim, and their wings are overshadowing it. And especially that top surface, the cover of this Ark of the Covenant, is like, for the people, the most important physical place for them. It's right there on that covering of this box that the high priest, would sprinkle the blood of forgiveness. It's this place of atonement. It's this place where their relationship could be established or be secure, where their sin could be covered so that people could be in this relationship with God. And so that is the first thing that is described, because this is the most important object for them in terms of what they need to do to maintain this relationship. And in this box, eventually the stone tablets with the Ten Commandments would be placed. There was a jar of the manna that they were given to eat was placed in there. But that's first described, and then, as you can see, the rest of the tabernacle is constructed to kind of house this Ark of the Covenant. You can find more details on the internet, detailed pictures of some of this. I would suggest that you be careful finding places that try to, draw a lot of spiritual meaning out of it, because some people kind of, I think, go too far in finding meaning. But you can find details about this building on the internet. I'm not going to go into all the details, but you can see on this image, there's the central tent divided into two areas: the holy place and then the most holy place, where this Ark of the Covenant was. And that was a place that most people didn't get into, just the high priest once a year. The holy place, priests could go in there daily to do things like change the bread, keep the light lit, and that kind of thing. And then there was this courtyard, a kind of tent around that. There was The altar were for burning the sacrifices. There was the bronze basin where the priests could wash their hands as they're going through their duties. But this was this tent, this tabernacle that God told them to build, to construct it in the midst of the camp. And in the middle of this tabernacle was this Ark of the Covenant, this most holy place where God would meet with them. In Exodus chapter 29, verses 43 to 46, God told Moses, I will meet there with the sons of Israel, and it will be consecrated by my glory. It will be made holy, made special by the glory of God descending on it. I will consecrate this tent of meeting and the altar, and I will also consecrate Aaron and his sons to minister as priests to me. I will dwell among the sons of Israel, and I will be their God. I will tabernacle among the sons of Israel, and I will be their God. And they will know that I am the Lord, I am Yahweh their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. One of the critical things that is said here is that God states explicitly one of the reasons, perhaps the main reason he has rescued them, not just for their own rescue, but to bring them to himself, to establish this relationship, a relationship in which he would live with them, that I would dwell, tabernacle among them, is what God says. Now, this might seem like a minor part in the story, the whole story of the Bible, but as a matter of fact, it's actually critical. It's actually an important step in the flow of the story. We've talked about, the flow of God's story, this big story, this meta-narrative of what God is doing and how different incidences in the story are very critical. And I've talked before about the importance of the beginning of the story and the end of the story and the place that has. So in the beginning of the story, Genesis 1 and 2, you have the creation story. God creates a world in which he's going to place human beings that he can relate to. And especially he's going to make this Garden of Eden. And that will be a special place where God is going to meet with Adam and Eve. And so we find that God, what it looked like, I don't know, but God walked in this garden with Adam and Eve and they could meet with him. And this is why this garden is created. It's not just, oh wow, a beautiful place. It's there precisely for the purpose of God's relationship with people, so he could walk with them, be with them, and they would be united. So that's how the story begins. But if you turn all the way to the end of the story, in Revelation chapter 21, you have the same image, exact same image. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and they come into being, and there's this holy city, a new Jerusalem. And in Revelation 21, verse 3, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, look, the tabernacle of God is with men. The tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell among them. In Greek, it's the same word. The tabernacle of God is with men, and he will tabernacle with them. And they will be his people, and God himself will be among them. So that's how the story begins, and that's how the story ends. And so right here in Exodus, we have a critical step in the development of this storyline. God is communicating something. He's advancing the story, and he's communicating what it is that he is doing. In this tabernacle, he will dwell with them. He will tabernacle with them. He will be among them. Another way to put it is, he's going to move into their neighborhood. So you might ask, Why a tent? Why a tent building? I mean, that we think of a tent as, someplace you go camping. Some of you maybe love camping. It's, your greatest thing to get into nature and to camp and all that kind of thing. Not me. I'd see no reason for a tent. I think there's a reason why people moved out of tents and into normal houses with normal toilets and hot showers. I'm not into the tent. But why a tent? Why did God have them build a tent? It's pretty simple. Everyone else is living in tents. And God's tent is simply in the middle of all these other tents. And all the people can walk out of their tent and say, oh, I live in this tent. And oh, there's God's tent. He lives with us and like us. He's at home with us. In the holy place, there's on the right-hand side, there's when you enter from the east, there's the table with the bread on it that is replaced regularly. There's always bread there. There's incense burning. And over here is the candlestick, and the lights are always burning. Why? Why is there always bread and why are there always lights? It's because when there's bread on the table and when the lights are there, someone is at home. God is at home with His people. And they have this constant reminder that their God lives with them. Just as they live in a tent, their God lives with them in this tent. So that's the kind of the main idea about the tabernacle. I'm going to come back to that. But that's the point of this story. Of course, there's lots of details given about the tabernacle, and those are fairly significant too. And because we're trying to keep this series fairly short, I'm not going to go into detail about the details in the tabernacle, but some of them are very important in terms of understanding the symbolism and the big picture of the ideas we need to learn from here. So for instance, again, if you picture this tabernacle, from the entrance on the east, there's the altar, there's a basin, then there's the tent and the holy place and most holy place. As you go from the entrance to the kind of the courtyard in, step by step, the materials that make up this tabernacle become more precious. You move from white linen in the courtyard surrounding that to much more precious and important and finely woven materials for this tent. You move from bronze to gold. And so that symbolism is very important because as you're approaching where God is, you have the more precious metals, and it's a way of reminding people that God is holy, and the closer you get to God, the more important your own holiness is, and you have to take careful steps to get there. You don't just go running in like you are. There's the sacrifices and the washing, and there's these steps. God is there, okay, but we have to keep this balance, and the tabernacle pictures the balance of, yes, God is there among the people, but you can't take Him for granted. Okay, He's God. He lives with you in a tent, but He is God. He is close, but He's God. Okay, and so we need to remember that He is special. He's with us, but He's not exactly like us. And so we have to exercise care. If He's going to live with us, we have to exercise this care. Another interesting thing about the details of the tabernacle is a lot of the figures that are carved or made with the gold or are embroidered on in the material and that kind of thing, is that they are they point to creation. They are plant life and so forth that are a reminder of creation. And part of what that is trying to indicate is that God is king over creation. He's certainly king over His people. And so, for instance, the Ten Commandments, in the Ark of the Covenant symbolize that He is king over His people. but he's king over creation. And so the tabernacle is kind of a symbol of all of creation. You know, it's a way of showing us that God lives in his creation, but he is Lord over creation. And so it's a way of just picturing who God is in all of creation. He inhabits creation, and we are reminded of that by being reminded that he inhabits this special space, and this special space in the tabernacle points to all of creation as a reminder that he is actually the Lord over all of creation. So that's just some of the details. And like I said, the details are rich, and there's a lot more that could be said about that. But I want to go back to this kind of primary point of the story of the tabernacle and why it is there. In Exodus chapter 40, and by the time we get to Exodus chapter 40, we're now about a year after the rescue. We don't know exactly how much time passed between Exodus chapter 1 and chapters 14 and 15. But by the time the people crossed the Red Sea and escaped, we're now about a year later, and they're finally going to put up this tabernacle. And a lot has happened between Exodus 25 and Exodus 40. And one of the critical parts of the flow of the story, and we'll look at it in a few weeks, is that there's going to be a massive rebellion against Yahweh their God. And the people are going to turn their back on Yahweh and try to find another way. And it's going to be a critical moment, and Moses is going to have to intercede for the people. And you would think at that point, God might say, well, I'm not living in that neighborhood with those complicated bunch of people. I'm not moving in there. I'm not putting my tent with them. But God doesn't do that. He doesn't change his mind. They're going to construct this tent, and God is going to move in. And so that's told in Exodus chapter 40, the last chapter in the book of Exodus. In verse 16 of Exodus 40, it says, "Thus Moses did, according to all that the Lord commanded him, so he did." And then 7 times in the next few verses, it says, they did this just as the Lord commanded them. And again, they did this just as the Lord commanded. And they did this just as the Lord commanded 7 times. And this is one of those times where the number 7 probably has meaning. And I mean, it's an important part of the creation story. And other stories, the number 7. So 7 times they did it just as the Lord commanded. And when they had done that, thus Moses finished the work. Then the cloud covered the tent of the meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled this tabernacle. Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the sons of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken out, they did not set out until the day when it was taken up. And throughout all their journeys, the cloud of the Lord, the presence of the Lord, was on the tabernacle by day, and there was fire in it by night in the sight of all the house of Israel. Then the cloud covered the tent of the meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. God moved into their neighborhood. God's presence would be with them. Once again, this is so critical for this overall story. It's got a connection to the beginning of the story, the creation story. It has a clear connection to the end of the story, the book of Revelation and the new heavens and the new earth, and God living among his people. But the most critical connection is stated most clearly in John chapter 1, verse 14. And I think it's a dead certainty that when John was writing these words in his gospel in chapter 1, he was thinking about the tabernacle. And he wrote, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, tabernacled among us. And we saw his glory. Glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. From his fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace. The law was given through Moses, but grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ." Now, we've been talking about truth and grace in the book of Exodus. There's grace and truth in the book of Exodus, but it was always limited. It had its place, but the law of Moses could only take the people so far. It wasn't a complete and perfect picture of grace and truth, and it could not by itself bring people where God wanted them to be. That could only happen in Jesus Christ. The fulfillment of the story could only happen in Jesus Christ. What John writes here tells us who Jesus is. He uses these same words. God tabernacled with his people, and the glory filled that tabernacle. That was Yahweh, God. And now John is saying, that's Jesus. Jesus is that. The Yahweh, God of his people, is Jesus. The Word became flesh and blood and made his neighborhood with us. He moved into our neighborhood. In Jesus, the Creator God of the universe has come close. I found this picture just thinking about God moved into our neighborhood of Jesus lives here. I mean, imagine that. Jesus is your neighbor. And of course, if something like that were true, you know, we would all think about what is the proper way to live with our neighbors. And this is another example why some kind of rules or regulations or laws are important, because it helps us to live together. I mean, here in Latvia, your neighbor comes or you go to visit someone, you enter the door, you take your shoes off. It's just appropriate thing to do. You know, there's other things in the neighborhood. You know, in this neighborhood, if Jesus lived in my neighborhood, I would probably mow my yard. You know what I'm saying? I'd keep the grass neat. I would rake the leaves. I wouldn't throw my garbage out in the front. If Jesus lived next door, I would just be aware. You know, there are some kinds of norms or expectations. But Jesus moves into our neighborhood. He moves into our tent, our body, the kind of body. Jesus entered a body like ours, flesh like ours. Jesus inhabits our socioeconomic class. He came as a baby. He came in a poor family. He came in the kind of flesh like we have, hungry like we are and thirsty like we are, getting tired like we do. That is the tent that Jesus entered. He moved into our neighborhood. He lives close. This is a relationship right next to us, right across the table from us. He's a father, he's a friend, he's a spouse, he's a neighbor. This is a relationship that God has always wanted with his people. So isn't this good news? This is the story. This is what God has always done, always wanted to do, to have a people that he lives with. And all of this is possible in Jesus. Jesus fulfills all the longings of our heart that we see in the book of Exodus. Jesus fulfills that. May the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you this week, and live in peace this week, knowing that Jesus is close to you.